Here we have today these wonderful soldiers who have come back from the front, and as I mentioned, you've already met them. One, Oleksandr Kosolapov, he is actually one of those who fought at the front along with his son. And so he is now rehabilitating and hoping to get back to Ukraine. I think that Oleksandr would like to say a few words.
Радий вас вітати.
I am pleased
В цьому
to
залі.
greet you.
Так сталося, що я народився і виріс, прожив
so
життя в
happened
той часті України, де зараз
that I
іде
was
війна.
born in
І
that
про
part of Ukraine where war is
гуманітарні
going
катастрофи,
on
про
right
які ви
now.
сьогодні тут розмовляли,
And
я знаю
I
не
know
понаслишки, а
about
ця
this
війна і ці жахіття,
not,
вона дуже сильно пройшла через
not
багато родин.
from
Якщо
hearsay, but from
сьогодні
first
кількість
And
загиблих на фронті
the number of
тисячі,
those
то
who
кількість біженців і переселенців мільйони. Це
are
насправді
thousands, the number of displaced
дуже великі
persons
масштаби,
are
і, на
millions.
жаль,
It's a
сьогодні
huge scale.
держава Україна не може сама
Unfortunately,
впоратись
the state of
з цією
Ukraine
великою
is not
проблемою, яка
capable
в
of
неї є.
handling
Я
this problem
хочу
on its own.
подякувати
So I'd like to
вам за
thank
те, що ви
you
обговорюєте ці питання, за те, що ви
for
приймаєте важливі рішення для нас.
these
І
matters
наш
and for
приїзд
making these important
сюди
decisions.
на лікування в Америку,
For us to come
я
here to
хотілося б
America,
вірити в те, що це
I would like to believe
перша така акція,
that
яка
this is the
дозволила
first
нам сюди приїхати,
such
бо
action that brought us
дуже велика
over.
кількість поранених
There is a big number of
залишається в
wounded
Україні, молодих хлопців, у
soldiers who
яких
remain in Ukraine,
все життя ще
young
попереду.
boys
І було б дуже
whose
гарно,
life
щоб
is
ця
ahead.
програма
It would be great
продовжувалась, бо
if this program
дуже важливо,
continued
щоб вони
because it's very
отримували
important
дуже
for
якісне
them
медичне
to
обслуговування,
get quality
щоб
medical
вони
care
отримували протези, якому це необхідно,
prosthetic limbs
щоб в подальшому
that they
вони
need,
могли
and
повертатися
so
в
that they
звичайне
could get
життя.
back to normal
Я
life
дуже
in the
вам
future.
дякую.
We are very thankful to
Thank
you.
you very much.
Я також хочу сказати, що
Олександра,
сьогодні
it's
є
your
день
birthday.
народження.
So I
Олександра,
want to ask her
думаю, що ми
to
всі
sing.
можемо разом заспівати йому «Многая літа». Многая літа, многая літа, многая літа, многая літа, многая літа, многая літа, многая літа. Very touching moment between General Clark and the soldiers. They exchanged stories, and General Clark was indeed a very moving moment.
I went to Ukraine the first time. I was 19 years old. I was a cadet at West Point, and I'd studied Russian for a couple of years, and one of my roommates, we changed roommates often, but one of them was a Ukrainian American. His name was John Kushkovsky, and John's father had fought in the Tsar's army, and when everything fell apart in 1916, John's father made it out, met a Russian woman also in that part of Poland that's now, I guess, part of Belarus. And they came to the United States, and he grew up in Baltimore. And we went to Ukraine. We met his uncle. We met the family. They were on a collective farm. And I was speaking Russian then, and I chased young women all over Kiev, trying to get them to talk to me as they were walking hand in hand on these beautiful days. I met some of the nicest people. It was a life-changing experience, really, to go there and to be in a foreign country and to speak the language and to see the differences in perspective. We spent most of a day in a very long, intricate exchange in the Lenin Museum. We went to the curator, and she was a lot like a religious person. She was like a priest. She was the priestess of Lenin, and she told us about Lenin, his life, and what he believed. And she showed us the medal on the wall. She says, "That's the gold medal he won in school." I said, "He won that medal? That very medal?" She said, "Oh, yes, that medal." I said, "No, but is that the real medal, or is that a replica? We never could quite get that straight. But she was a fervent believer in the principles of Marxism-Leninism. As we went back out to the West, we were at a lunch and we saw 4 Soviet officers. And so we spoke to them, they invited us to their table, and we had this amazing conversation in Russian about the 2 contrasting systems and what had just happened in the Olympics and who won what event and who had the best astronauts. And as I remember them saying, we have the first female astronaut. And there was a lot of pride and a lot of sense of community and a lot of shared interests. And I thought, you know, it would be a terrible thing if anything ever happened and we actually did go to war against people that could have so much in common. So it changed my life going there, and especially the trip in Kiev. It was a beautiful city. It had already been rebuilt. And I thought about the battles of World War II and what it must have done to the people there. I was privileged many years later to become the NATO commander. And I looked at all the nations of Eastern Europe. And it wasn't what I had hoped it would be. You know, when we decided to enlarge NATO, it was a very controversial move. People were, they were ambivalent about it because they were afraid that by enlarging NATO, we might embarrass, provoke, cause trouble. And we didn't want to do it. But ultimately, we did do it because people asked us to. Countries asked us to. And when I became the NATO commander, I remember going to Romania, and I talked to the minister and the president and so forth. President Constantinescu said, up there on that mountain, he said, that's where your CIA used to parachute the spies until 1960. I mean, Americans never knew we were doing that, but I guess we did. I mean, that's what he told me. And I asked Minister of Defense Babiuk, I said, Minister, I mean, Romania, you know, you're a member of Partnership for Peace, but do you want to be in NATO? He said, certainly. I said, why? Does it have anything to do with Russia? He said, of course. I said, people in the United States don't understand this. Can you explain this better to me? Are there incidents? Is there something in particular? He said, yes, General, there have been many incidents. I said, well, tell me a couple so I can relate to them. He said, certainly. He said, in 1878, we allowed the Russian forces to cross our territory to go to Yugoslavia, and when they came back, they took our province of Bessarabia. And, you know, I would tell that story to people in Washington, they would all laugh because, you know, Americans can't remember 1978, much less 1878. But Eastern Europe is different, and memories are long there. In 1999, in November, Mr. Putin went to President Kuchma's inauguration. Ukraine had a special dialogue with NATO that we set up in 1997, and I was friendly with the Ukrainian delegation in Brussels and others, and I didn't make President Kuchma's inauguration, though I was invited. But one of the people who was there came back and told me, he said, this was a Polish man who was the national security advisor for Poland. He said, very dangerous. He said, Mr. Putin spoke, and what he said was, he said, Ukraine and Russia are more than brothers. We are in each other's souls. He said, Russia will try to retake Ukraine, and with it, there will be danger for all of Europe. Well, okay, this is the Polish position, okay? If you know Eastern Europe, you know the Poles might be particularly sensitive to that kind of thing. But I watched this as it unfolded. I went back to Ukraine in 2005 as a guest of President Kuchma and spoke to Ukrainian military officers and talked to them and watched the changes that were underway. I met with the U.S. ambassador there. So I've been following this and trying to do business. I went back on a business trip a couple of years later, looking at infrastructure privatization. And it was a tragedy unfolding in front of my eyes, because the transition from a communist system to a democratic market system is so incredibly difficult. You can't imagine unless you had lived through it. But you could, because many of you have relatives who did live through it. No pensions, no medical care, high inflation. Suddenly people are getting wealthy. Why did they get wealthy? How do they deserve this? It's shocking when it happens. I watched it all through Eastern Europe. And Ukraine may have had it the most difficult time of all with it. So I know some of the oligarchs. I know how they behaved. I was in Kazakhstan. I'll watch it in Kazakhstan as well. It's a disturbing, difficult transition. I watched the effort in 2004 to change things. Ukrainian officers called me and spoke to me and told me what was going on. It was a struggle. Ultimately, it didn't succeed. And I held my breath in the fall of 2013 as the Maidan movement began, because I knew what it was about. You see, if Ukraine completes its transition to Western democracy, market-oriented economy, a fair and equitable, just society, the rule of law, transparency in international in its own internal institutions. If Ukraine can do this, there's no more war in Europe, ever, ever. Ukraine is the centerpiece of the future. And making that transition is important, not just for the people of Ukraine, for Poland, for the Baltics, for the Balkan countries, for Germany, for France, for Britain, and especially for the United States. Democracy, as those of you who live here know, is a very imperfect institution. It's filled with challenges. It's up and down. It teeters from side to side. There's no guiding hand. It's like the parlor game that we used to play called Ouija board, where a bunch of people put their hands on a table and move it around and messages appear. No one can exactly predict the outcome of an election. In this country, the struggle between the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. And yet, we know that this process is the fairest, most efficient, most effective long-term way for people to live together in peace. And if Ukraine makes this transition, it's a huge achievement for Ukraine and a huge achievement for mankind. Those soldiers on this stage, they were fighting for all of us. They weren't fighting for money, because most of them didn't get paid. Some of them bought their own weapons. They weren't fighting for oil. They weren't fighting for some Middle East sheikh or king. They were fighting for values, for the right to govern themselves through a democratic process that respects human beings. It's the highest value that we've got, really, as a civilization, as what you might call Western civilization today. It's a set of values that have rolled across the world for 250 years. And Ukraine is the frontier, but it's also the linchpin of Eurasia. So I can't stress enough the importance of what's going on in Ukraine. You watched those 4 soldiers on stage, and I'm very grateful that Walter Reed took care of them, and I'm proud that I wish we could have brought 18,000 to the United States. But it's not just a military battle. That battle is still underway. There's still soldiers in the front lines, but those soldiers in the front lines, they can't win this. They could lose it if they were to collapse, but they can't win it. This battle has to be won here in Europe and on the ground in Ukraine in political, economic, and humanitarian terms. It has to be won politically. As Ukraine reforms its institutions, brings forth new generations of leaderships, reshapes institutions to take account of the constituents, to respect individuals' rights and lives and property. It has to be won economically as people invest in Ukraine because they know that there's a rule of law and a process and a respect for property rights, and not just talented, really smart people, which are there, but an investment environment in which foreign capital can come in, receive a return, and create things. And it has to be won on a humanitarian basis, not just by giving immediate, urgent need, although that's very important, but on a longer-term basis by creating a fairer, more just society between the haves and the have-nots, between the oligarchs and those who took advantage of the collapse of the Soviet system and those who saw it and couldn't take advantage of it in the same way. So there's big work to be done here. We can't turn our backs. The fact that each morning I get my report from the Ukraine Crisis Media Center and I look at the number of incidents and the number of Ukrainian soldiers killed and wounded, that's not the measure. I'm glad that it's Minsk II is holding right now. It's not the measure. The measure is what happens in the rest of the society. The measure is, can Ukraine set the example for the rest of Europe? Why not? Nobody has any better educated population than Ukraine. No group of people have the scale that Ukraine has in Europe. Ukraine has the technology, the smarts, the education, the capital resources, the natural resources, the beauty. It has everything it needs. And it has the example of having twice struggled to express its desire for democracy and freedom, and now has that opportunity. So Ukraine can't do it alone. Got to have help from us here. We've got to keep the attention focused. We've got to use our institutions in Washington. We've got to weigh in with the Europeans. We've got to help those in Ukraine who come back to us for moral support, for financial support, for humanitarian support, for political support, and yes, for military support. We've got to help because this is our battle. So you're here today and you spent the day in Washington. You heard all the people involved in Ukraine, and I hope what you take away from this is that this is an ongoing struggle. And now, ladies and gentlemen, you're part of that struggle. You've been exposed. You can't duck it. You know the truth as we see it. And it's your obligation to carry that truth and that message back home and to talk to your friends and neighbors and families and keep Ukraine in our thoughts and prayers and actions, because much of mankind's future is being decided in Ukraine, hour by hour, day by day. President Poroshenko, all of his team, all of the people, the soldiers in the front lines, the finance minister who's making the rounds of Europe. That's our struggle. And if Ukraine succeeds, we succeed, and we've got a bright future. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us today. I honor those soldiers who fought, and I honor those Ukrainian patriots who are fighting for Ukraine and for all of us. Thank you.
Made by the blacksmith of Ivano-Frankivsk.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.